the temple and the leaders behind it, they're trying to shush this message because it's going quite annoying and threatening. Verse 17, the high priest and his officials, who were Sadducees, were filled with jealousy. They arrested the apostles and put them in the public jail. But an angel, the Lord, messenger of the Lord, came at night, opened the gates of the jail, and brought them out. Then he told them, go to the temple and give the people this message of life. So at daybreak, the apostles entered the temple as they were told and immediately began teaching. This is the word of our Lord. Thanks be to God. Advertisements are everywhere. On the streets, on the bus, on the ground, in the subway. They are everywhere, even on the air, in an airplane ride. Advertisements are everywhere, even on skin. Do you know that people who will sell their skin, tattoo, advertisements, company names for some money? Like Billy Gibby is his name, and he's come to be known as Billy the Billboard. And he sold $15,000 for any advertisement on the arm, $30,000 on the face, because that's premium space. Advertisements everywhere. And every advertisement has a message. They feel it's an important message. I mean, why would they go through all the troubles and all that money if not they consider it important message? Last Sunday night, we had a family dinner, and we were out, and we caught a Sunday night pregame show, and there were these experts of football talking about who will win and why with such intellectual rigor. After all, football games is of cosmic consequence, and so they were going at it, and my son was looking at it, and he asked a profound question. He said, Dad, why is there a huge low sign right in the middle of the table? And I looked at it, and it was there. Big capital letters, LOWES. Taking up about 1/3 of the TV screen estate. And under it, you guys know what it says, Lowe's? You guys know it? But never stop improving, right? And he said, why is this? And I told him, well, this is why. Companies buy space, and they want you to get to know their company, hear it so much that you have this false sense of trust. And after this false sense of trust, then they want you to buy the product. Never stop improving. Now, there's some truth to that. You know, we should always grow and mature. It's good. But they don't really want you to grow in your spiritual life or in your relationship. What they want you to do is make a bigger deck. A deck that's bigger than your Joneses. And by the way, we got the tools and we got the materials. Write us a check. We'll help you to make the bigger deck. So you see, advertisement is basically messages from the evil empire. No, I didn't say evil empire. But I just say that every message is telling you, promising you something good, but always taking that away. Every advertisement has a message, and every message promises life, but not every message can actually deliver. In fact, there's only one message that promises and delivers, and it is the message of Christ. This is the true message of life. And there is competition. Oh yeah, there's always competition. Right? The temple didn't want this new message to get so popular because even the temple had a message. And the temple itself was the advertisement. This temple was humongous. It was one of the wonders of the world at that age. It was larger than the Colosseum. It stood at the highest elevation of city of Jerusalem, and it was massive. And it was a way to say, this is the holiest place on earth. And its message to peoples were, God is angry at you. You better pay your dues. The temple tax dues, the holy festivals, all the holy festivals must happen here. So pilgrims come on in, and you must be hungry, buy some more food. Lodging will pay for the lodging, and you could even buy souvenirs. Yes, this whole tourist trap, it even had happened back in those days. And of course, you got to make the right sacrifices. And who are the one who says, this is good and this is not good? The priest. Oh, and who supplied those animals? The priest. That sounds like a monopoly. And it was. The message was, you want to be close to God, you have to go through us. And this small group of Galileans saying, no, Christ is the only way. Which is to say, all you need is Christ. Christ is the one who made the ultimate sacrifice. If we trust him, then he can rescue us. And they were offering an alternative message. And the board members of the temple, the Sadducees, the leaders, said Sanhedrin, said this cannot do. They are contradicting our message. Did you notice that? Anytime the temple's message gets conflicted or competed against, they will act right away. Like Jesus. Jesus teaching in the Galilee, that's okay. Then he comes into the city and he goes in the temple. You know what he does? He upturns the table. And he says, this is a den of robbers. And this should be a house of prayer, because there was, again, the monopoly that was just sucking all the money out from the people. And it's at that time when the people said, we better do something about Jesus. And there was another time when Jesus said, raise this temple down and I'll rebuild it in 3 days. That's when they started plotting murder against Jesus. You could talk about all your stuff that you want in Galilee, that's fine, but come into the temple and say, temple is not necessary? Who was the first martyr? And we'll get to that in chapter 6 in Acts. It was Stephen. The reason why Stephen was martyred, there were several reasons. One, he was a Grecian Jew. But the second one was because he was pretty direct in his message. So the accusations was against him in Acts chapter 6. Says he speaks against the temple and the Mosaic law. But you see the first thing, the temple. That's their sacred cow. That's the advertisement. That's the message. And against this, the Galileans say, no, there is Christ. And this is the only true message of life. And actually, there were evidences of it. Whereas the temple might have had the money, the big billboards, and this little small church, they didn't have any billboards. They couldn't put any product placement in any movies. They had no resources, but there was power of life everywhere. There was remember the lame man born lame for 40 years, and he's somersaulting all through the temple and praising God. That's life. And then there is the previous passages, which I'll read, Acts chapter 5, verse 12 through 16. These are the happenings before the arrest. The apostles were performing many miraculous signs and wonders among the people. And all the believers were meeting regularly at the temple in the area known as Solomon's Colonnade. But no one else dared to join them. Even though all the people had high regard for them, yet more and more people believed and were brought to the Lord, crowds of both men and women. As a result of the apostles' work, sick people were brought out into the streets on beds and mats so that Peter's shadow might fall across some of them as he went by. Crowds came from the villages around Jerusalem, bringing their sick and those possessed by evil spirits, and they were all healed. Life, life, life restored, life renewed, physical life, spiritual life. This was the message of life. So they had to act fast. The board got together, and they said, we gotta shut this down now. They arrested the apostles, and at that night, I'm sure these leaders, they slept pretty good. They're like, we should have done this sooner. And then the morning comes, they put on the expensive robes, gold gilded. It cost them a lot. The robe costed a lot, but the position too. Maybe some of them half their savings. And they went to the court of the hewn stone, and it was a massive court to show to the people where the authority belongs. And they looked over the people they judged. And this was at the north side of the temple and overlooked the temple court too. So these board members, these Sanhedrins, can overlook everything and stand on top of everything, ready to judge. And they said, bring in the guards. And the temple guards were not even Jews. They were mercenaries. They were Cretans and Arabs who were hired to do the dirty work. And they needed to feed the family. So they weren't really even invested. So bring in the guards. By bringing the prisoners, they came empty-handed. So, we went, and the doors were locked, and all the guards were accounted for, but they're not there. What are you saying? We went, and the doors were locked. I know what you said, but what are you saying when you said they're not there when it's all locked? I don't know. Did you look carefully? That 3-foot block? Yes, we did. Up and down. They're not there. And then someone runs in. You know those guys you locked up and said, don't preach at the temple? They're preaching again at the temple. They were rescued by the messenger of God, the angels. Rescued so now they could run away and save the neck, but they could go back to the very bee's nest. Go back to that temple and challenge their message with the only message that gave life. Go proclaim the message of life. And they went and they proclaimed it. And friends, you are privileged. You are honored. You have the message of life. The only message of life in this world. Think about it. Do you think there's anything in this world that can rescue an individual? Lowe's company cannot do that. Keep improving. But they really don't care if your spiritual life is improving or not. Or if your relationship with spouse improves or not. In fact, broken families is a good way for them to make more money. Because when people are broken, they start buying things. Trying to fix things they could fix with their hands. Because it's so hard to do. The spirit. And Google company, right? They say, do no evil. They're not that innocent, are they? But they also at least don't pretend that they can save us from evil. There's nothing in this world that is truly a message of life that can rescue an individual and a community and a society. Not a government. Not even U.S. There's no message, but here's the message that you and I have. It is a message of God, the only one that can give life. About God loving us so much and wanting to meet us where we are, that he takes on the human flesh, he becomes a poor peasant, he walks this earth, and he suffers all that pain and suffering to simply open his arms and says, you see, I love you. And to prove that love was real, he doesn't just suffer death, he overcomes death. There is no other story like this. This is a message that we have. So preach it. Share this message of life. Kurt Vonnegut, he's an ardent atheist, but he was always drawn to this message of Christ. He never could take that step towards faith, but it always drew him. And one time he went, and he's an atheist, he's checking out all these other religions, and he went to this one meeting in the hotel in Cambridge about transcendental meditation. And after he came back from that meeting, he wrote this, a scathing remark. Here it is. He listened to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. That's why I had to find this passage, because I couldn't remember that name. It was entitled, Yes, We Have Nirvanas. And after hearing the talk, he says this. I went outside the hotel liking Jesus better than I had ever liked him before. I wanted to see a crucifix so I could say to it, you know why you're up there? It's your own fault. You should have practiced transcendental meditation. It was being sarcastic. Right? He was saying this type of religion about, you going inside yourself or meditating, he found it so wrong, so false, such lies. And again, even though he couldn't take that final step to believe the Christ Son of God, that story, he felt there was a sense of life. So much so that actually this atheist wrote Christmas carols and hymns. And he had to explain to his friend, like, why are you writing this? And he said this, I am not a Christian either like you, but you have to admit, it's his language, okay? It's one hell of a story. There's something so true about this story. What held him back is the sense of naturalism, that there can be no miracles, but the story that's God dying and rising and loving us. So much so that even it compels an ardent atheist. And this is the message that we have. And so friends, be bold. Share it. Share it at the temple. Share it in the city halls. Share it in your classrooms. Share it where you work. Share it in your cubicles. Share it next to your water cooler. Share it in your homes, in your living room, as you eat with your children. Share it as you invite your neighbors. Share it. This is the message of life. You have it. We have it. And we have the privilege to share this. So then, how do we share this? Okay, this could be a long teaching like that, but just two things, just from the story. Two things that the apostles did. Okay. One is this. They went about doing supernatural work. Okay, this is just part of the story. Remember, I just read to you what the apostles were doing. They were healing the sick. So much so that even Peter's shadow falls upon them, then they got well. Now, I know this is kind of hard for us to maybe accept as people who are kind of educated in the naturalist society. We're born in a naturalist society where we deny miracles. That's basically the type of high school education that I grew up with. So much so that even one renowned scholar, biblical scholar, Bultmann, he says this, to turn on electricity and to listen to radio, it's hard to accept the miracles in the New Testament. And so even the biblical scholars, look at the miracles and they're like, those are just ancient people who are still superstitious, but they kind of go with the story, but we need to kind of allegorize it. Or, as Thomas Jefferson did, he just ripped apart all the miracles and just left the sayings of Jesus and made him into a moral teacher. And I wonder sometimes if we do that, and I have to admit, sometimes I do that. I think as I read this, the miracle, that's amazing. And maybe the way I say is, only in those days. Only in those days. But nowadays, no. And so we kind of dismiss it. And so when we are sharing the message, we focus more on how can I persuade the other person, right? How can I be more eloquent? How can I express it in their philosophical system and to show that their assumptions are wrong, where my assumptions are tenable, reasonable, and so by words, persuade them to believe what I believe. That's how most apologetics nowadays goes, but there's a shortcoming to that. And here we see that actually one of the ways in which these guys challenge the message of the temple, and eventually they will challenge the message of the empire, not only the temple, they will go to Caesar's court. The way they do it is actually miracles. Miracles. Supernatural. Friends, do you and I believe that God still does these works of miracles? These works of things that cannot be explained through medical things. When you think about it, even the most miracle-denying naturalists, in their very beginning, they have to accept supernatural, isn't it? Right? First of all, just us as Christians, if we believe that Jesus rose from the dead, that's a pretty supernatural thing. If we accept that, but then deny that today God does miracles, that's a contradiction in our logic. If Christ rose from the dead, and that is central to our belief, and Christ can still do these mini resurrections. But let's say even a naturalist who denies the resurrection, Jesus is just a man who died and then people kind of told this story. Even a naturalist, they cannot explain the very beginning of creation. You could talk to them. They say all our scientific laws can begin to explain a few seconds after the Big Bang and talk about all these laws and all these factors like that. But as far as like that first burst of creation from nothing to something, you can't explain it. So what do? You just have to believe it. So even the most natural thinker at its foundation must accept something supernatural. God is at work, my friends. If Christ rose from the dead, why wouldn't Christ show glimpses of that power even today? Christ does. Christ still heals. And in many ways, as you share the message, we must trust in this power of the resurrection and actually show it. Not in an exhibitionist way, like, look at me, I have this power and shadow falls upon you. It's not like that, but the way the apostles did. They were unafraid to pray, unafraid to lay hands on people, unafraid to seek healing. I think quite often where our message is kind of stops is that we're not asking God to enter into this witnessing. And God, you do your work. I've shared the story with you, I think, about my grandpa, how he got saved. It wasn't by eloquence. It was my grandma praying hard. And my grandpa was set against this Christian message, which he just thought was just a bunch of lies. And suddenly he was struck dumb. He couldn't speak. And that's when he called for a local pastor. And when a local pastor came, and they began singing a hymn, by the third verse, his lips opened and he began singing. Miracles. Miracles. So here's a challenge. Right? If there's people that you are trying to witness to, be sure that you are very clear in what you're sharing, that you believe Jesus rose from the dead and he is God's son. And now, they will not accept all of it and they will argue, and that's fine. But also say, is there anything that I can pray for? And if there's a need, take the challenge. Say, I'm going to pray to my God for those things. Okay? And if God doesn't answer, then that's all on God. Right? But God will come through. When his name is on the line, especially when it's about bringing a person to faith. Again, Lesslie Newbigin, again, a brilliant thinker. He wrote a book about foolishness to the Greeks. He has an intellect, and he has so many experiences in mission work. And he said, out of all the mission work, and he does all the apologetics, he knows what philosophy to use and all that. He says that at the end, though, every person, every Indian person that has become converted, there's always some miracle that he experienced that made them open to the gospel. And if you know Lesslie Newbigin, he's not a superstitious person at all. Right? So I think we're missing out on this great power when we are not praying for the work of God. Now, there's a bigger thing here, okay? So it's not just, again, just supernatural showing itself and then pointing that maybe there's some truth to the message. But think about it. In what other story in the Bible were there signs and wonders to do the liberating work of God? In what other story was there a meeting of two messages in a court of authority? Pharaoh, right? And Moses. They met together and they said, whose God is the real God? And there were signs and wonders. The first one with rod to the snake. And of course, the Egyptian, they were able to follow but just for a few. And after a while, they couldn't follow. And so in this story, as we're here, the early Christians realized that this is a story of Exodus. And here it is, Christ redeeming his people by showing signs and wonders. And Christ still does that. So the first thing is that, trusting in the miracle. Be willing to pray and risk that prayer. The second part comes actually in one of the admissions of Gamaliel. He's here in Acts chapter 5. Verse 34. So now they see these apostles and they're doing amazing things. They can't just go and just grab them and do whatever they want because the people are seeing the signs and wonders. But one member, a Pharisee named Gamaliel, who was an expert in religious law and respected by all the people, stood up and ordered that the men be sent outside the council chamber for a while. Then he said to his colleagues, men of Israel, take care of what you are planning to do to these men. Some time ago, there was that fellow, Theudas, who pretended to be someone great. About 400 others joined him, but he was killed, and all his followers went their various ways. The whole movement came to nothing. After him, at the time of the census, there was Judas of Galilee, and these are all historical figures. You could hear about these from other historians who wrote at the time. He got people to follow him, but he was killed too, and all his followers were scattered. So my advice is this: leave these men alone. Let them go. If they're planning and doing these things merely on their own, it will soon be overthrown. But if it is from God, you will not be able to overthrow them. You may even find yourselves fighting against God. Gamaliel seems to be a little bit more humble guy, that maybe we could be wrong. How can we know? He says, just leave the community alone. Let's see what they do. If it's not from God, they will just fizzle out. They will disband. There's no way that they could sustain a lie. But if it's true, and these guys live by that truth, there's nothing you can do. So you see what I'm saying? The community itself now becomes the evidence of the message, the proof of the message. The second thing in our arsenal as we're sharing the message, not just the healing work of God, the miraculous work of God, but this is the community. What happens if the community can embody all those things that they say is true? Christ rose, and so Christ reconciled. And what if the church really did reconcile? Rather than always dividing and fighting and dividing and fighting. We say Christ is the Lord of the universe, bring the Jews and Gentiles. And what if all the churches were diverse and were to accept every ethnic culture rather than having just monocultural? Then the church, there's no man or woman, but everyone's equal. So then the church too, there's equality for every sex to lead and to teach. What if the church, see the biggest hindrance really to a message is the church itself, isn't it? We say Christ is the Lord, but we look at the lifestyle or even the church organization and they're just like the secular world. Where is the evidence of the resurrection? Okay, and here, Lester Newbegin, he says this: how can the strange story of God made flesh, it is strange, of a crucified Savior, of resurrection, and new creation become credible for those whose entire mental training has conditioned them to believe that the real world is a world which can be satisfactorily explained and managed without the hypothesis of God? Okay, this is the world that we live in a very natural world. How can we say this message? I know of only one clue to the answering of that question, only one real hermeneutic interpretation of the gospel: a congregation which believes it. A congregation which believes that Jesus rose from the dead, and so it's a whole new world, and the kingdom is now, and we are part of that first examples of the kingdom. If we believe it, then people will believe it too. It's because we don't really believe that. Isn't it? You know, in the tsunami, the great tsunami 2004, 150,000 people died in less than 2 hours. And everybody rushed in. And in Indonesia, dominantly Muslim society, what they were surprised at is most of the agencies that came in were Christians. And when the media moved on to the next thing, most of the agencies moved on, but many of the Christian agencies stayed. World Vision was one of them that stayed. And Tim Dearborn, I met him at the Michael Goodman Fuller Seminary. He tells about the story that he was there around 2006. And then that's when the Amish shooting in school, do you remember when the children were just murdered by this man? It broke out, and the newspaper all around, you got to know, whenever something happens in America, everybody says, look how dangerous America is. International news, they jump on it. And it's like, oh, dangerous. Right? Who wants to go to America? And just pouncing upon that. And then a few days later, another story came about how this Amish family, these mothers of the children who were murdered, they made food, and they went to the widow of that murderer and gave her food and said, we forgive you. And the imam, scratching his head, went to this Christian pastor. What is this? How do you explain this? Is this just a culture or the gospel? And the pastor, Tim, answered, it's both. There's this gospel that says, forgive the enemies. And this community believed that that can be a community value. That as a community, you could really live by this. And that you have a joyful life by doing this. Now that's the message of life, which the Imam cannot argue against. We have the message of life. You and I, we have the only message of life. No company can rescue a soul, and no government can rescue a society. But God, He can rescue even the soul that is in the darkest, in the most filthiest place. And He will renew this world, and it will be full of His glory, and it will be the kingdom of God. And until then, we have the privilege of the message. So pray, let God do His miraculous supernatural work, and believe in it, my friends. Believe in it. New life. Believe in it. Let's live this. Let's pray.